What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you the games I have enjoyed the most so far in 2025, which is a list that is honestly so bursting with games in the first half of this year that I actually decided to up it from my normal 5 to 7. As even just here halfway through, it really has been a tremendous year already. Though it's far from done, with plenty of other titles coming in the back half of the year to make things equally interesting. And while I have already talked here and there about some games I have enjoyed, games that surpassed my expectations, that kind of thing, I've never actually made a video yet that just talked specifically about the games I enjoyed the most this year. At least thus far, which is of course what we're doing here, which probably bears a mention then that I am only talking about new releases. I have played plenty of older titles this year, including several Final Fantasy titles such as Final Fantasy XII, and while I enjoyed it a great deal, having played it previously quite a bit, it's also ultimately a game from 2006, so we're going to try to keep this list a little more current. But from there, let's go ahead and kick this thing off, as we've got a few games to mention, and here at the bottom of the list, I actually wanted to talk a little bit about Like a Dragon Pirate Yakuza, which is a spin-off title, of course, of Infinite Wealth that released earlier in the year. And unfortunately, I haven't had too much of a reason to talk about it since then, but I did want to throw it on this list because just in terms of sheer enjoyment of the nonsense, this game is definitely up there for me. Which is probably no surprise given how Infinite Wealth was as well. But what I really liked about Pirate Yakuza here is with the switch back to their more traditional beat-em-up style of combat, it really does a great job of vastly increasing the pace of experiences and things we have already seen via Infinite Wealth. So you can focus on the stuff you enjoy and kind of plow your way through the stuff you don't enjoy as much, which does make it feel a little more focused as a result. While I enjoyed the story and the continuation of all that stuff from Infinite Wealth as well, the realistic thing to have the most fun with here is all of the various mini-games, the ship customization, that kind of thing, and it's just a very nonsense, fun little title. And I really enjoy that thing as a sort of break from a lot of the heavier RPGs I play most of the time, and thus, obviously, it made this list. That does bring us to our second entry, though, which is actually going to be Avowed. Now, Avowed is an interesting one because, in many ways, I had a lot of fun with it because I love the Pillars of Eternity series, which, the World of Eora, as it's called, is where Avowed is set in. So seeing Avowed take up the torch of all that lore and stuff and carry it forward was of great interest to me regardless of the game they made, especially since Avowed is set just a couple of years after the cliffhangers that we received as part of Pillars of Eternity 2 Deadfire. In fact, I was looking forward to the launch of Avowed so much, I was inspired to go back and complete the Ultimate Challenge for Deadfire as well, which I became the 15th official person to do since that challenge launched all the way back in 2019. Not going to bore people with the details, but suffice to say it's very difficult. And yet, in spite of all that, I still find myself wishing that Avowed had been a little bit more ambitious, which is ultimately why I didn't enjoy it quite as much as I was hoping to, especially given that there are obviously other titles on this list that are higher, and if I'm being a little more objective, I would say that Avowed was a pretty good game, but it wasn't really a great game, especially with all of the growing pains from the sort of genre switch between Pillars of Eternity and, of course, Avowed here. So even with all of that said, however, as somebody who just really enjoys the world of Eora, and the fact that this game inspired me to take up a challenge I had been just making passing attempts at over the years and finally get it done, while also seeing the continuation and some expanding of some of the lore available to us as part of that world was just a really fun experience for me personally. And thus, here we are, but keeping it moving, next up we've got the first Berserker, Khazan, one of the games on this list I've talked about frequently up to this point, mostly because I was surprised at how good it wound up being. As a Souls-like, it is obviously relying on a pretty tried and tested formula that, while, honestly pretty good overall, is a market that is extremely saturated these days. I mean, just looking at things like the recent Summer Games Fest announcements, a significant amount of those announcements were Souls-likes, as an example, and so there's certainly some fatigue with the genre happening. And I honestly kind of feel that myself at times. There's only so many ways these games can differentiate from each other, and yet, in spite of that, Khazan actually managed to do it. It makes some subtle tweaks to the formula that I think dramatically improve the gameplay experience while focusing on the most important parts, and playing through the first Berserker Khazan gave me that feeling of overcoming challenges that I have not personally had from a Souls-like in quite some time, and I think that just in and of itself is pretty remarkable. But even just the more little ingenious changes like allowing boss attempts to give you cumulative experience that you can spend leveling up, so as you're beating your head against a boss, you can eventually, level up and actually make legitimate progress, which really is just a great subtle change. Combine that with fun levels, fun boss fights, and the like, and it was just a really great experience, surprisingly so. Though perhaps I shouldn't have been too surprised, given that it clearly takes a lot of cues from games like Nioh and Nioh 2, which are also Souls-likes I enjoyed a lot, so maybe it was always a given. But either way, enjoyed it a lot. Obviously, that's what it's on this list for. Coming in at number 4, we have, I would say, a welcome addition in the form of Tainted Grail, The Fall of Avalon. So this is a game I knew was coming for quite some time, as it had been in early access for quite a while. And given some of its overall gameplay, making very obvious comparisons to things like, say, Skyrim or Oblivion or some of Bethesda's other titles as an example is pretty much a given, especially when you start comparing things like bugs and whatnot, which this game also certainly had, especially around launch, and they're already working on fixing some of that as this was a more recent release. But for me at least, Tainted Grail is one of those games where all of its systems come together to form something a little bigger than the sum of its parts, and while some of those individual systems are certainly quite weak, taken as a whole picture, it's this really fun RPG where you're going to be making some choices. There's consequences, obviously. You're dealing with factions, crafting, making a unique character build based off of the just really awesome items you'll be finding. The game has great itemization, as an example, that also makes you look like a badass most of the time, which always helps. Combine all of that with its sort of dark and gritty take on Arthurian legend, and you have a game that makes it very easy to get wrapped up in the world that it presents you with. And so, perhaps precisely because it's a sort of odd, janky AA title, you can really tell that the people who made this cared about it, and I think that passion shines through in a lot of what the game has to offer, which is, at least in part, why I enjoyed it so much. The other part being that it let me electrocute people with a big hammer, which is always a crowd pleaser. Coming in on our top 3, though, these ones are, I'm sure, much less unheard of for the people who have been watching my channel regularly. I've talked about these ones quite a bit in the months leading up here, but I'm very much so expecting these 3 to top some measure of my own Game of the Year awards at the very least, if they don't go on to win them for themselves, with the exception of one of them, because it's a remaster, or technically, and I don't think it should really be up for those awards. Kicking off the top 3 with Expedition 33, as would be fitting. A game with a really beautiful story. I enjoy it as a JRPG, sure, it does a lot of fun things that sort of westernize the JRPG genre, which has been happening more and more as of late, though I think it's fairly safe to say that Expedition 33 has largely been one of the more successful titles to have done so. And while you can set up and do some fun things with its turn-based battles, as its progression systems of Lumina and Pictos allow you to mix and match all sorts of effects and come up with some really interesting combos in combination with individual character skills, and the combat's slightly more active take that allows you to do things like free aim or parry and dodge via enemy waves, that kind of stuff, all makes it a little more engaging than it really had to be. But what really sells Expedition 33 more so than anything else is by far and away its story, which really resonated with me in the way it resonated with many other people, I would imagine, which is why it's sitting on overwhelmingly positive reviews these days. Reviews it has certainly earned. It's a great game, and I'm glad to see that it wound up being so successful. But while I did enjoy this game a great deal, there are 2 other games so far that I have enjoyed more, and the first one of those is definitely Kingdom Come Deliverance 2. Right now, as of, June 2025, this is my personal frontrunner for Game of the Year, just because it kind of ticks all the boxes of what I really love from a video game. And while truth be told, if you follow the channel much at all, my preferred genre is definitely CRPGs, and that remains the case. But in terms of like these open world adventures type things, Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 is really what I love to see from those games. In fact, in many ways, it almost feels like an extension of another game I love, which is The Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion. Obviously with a different setting and everything, but mechanically speaking, it kind of feels like it took that sort of gameplay and tried to expand on it and take it in more directions, which is what they did with the first game, and then obviously Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 refines a lot of that stuff. So mechanically speaking, it's a game I really enjoy, as I think they addressed a lot of the jank and awkwardness from the first game, and while you could definitely argue some of that stuff is still present, as it will likely always be in the case of large open world adventures like this, but it is still a much, much more refined experience than that original game, and given that the original game also leaves off on a bit of a cliffhanger of sorts that Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 immediately picks up on, and then brings all of those narrative arcs they set up to a really satisfying conclusion that takes into account your choices and the way you played through these games as Henry, really made me feel like you got the ending that you deserved. Which is just a couple of reasons that, as of right now, Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 is actually my most played game so far this year. As of this moment, the time I'm making this video, I'm currently going through trying to finish up my hardcore all negative perks playthrough, which I need to finish up for the last couple of achievements that they've added since launch. It's just been hard to, of course, review everything else and also make time for that, which is a time-consuming endeavor in and of itself, but I am making my way through it. I'm about to hit some major plot events before making my way to Kuttenberg, and depending on the timing, I might actually wind up streaming the sort of finale of that particular run, as it's already been a blast, given the way that hardcore mode alters, for instance, all of the various gameplay mechanics that makes it this really, really immersive experience that I love to experience. But it's a tremendous game, and so far it's been the one I have personally enjoyed the most because it's the kind of game that speaks to me very much. And yet, as all of my allusions to Oblivion there may have hinted at, there is one higher place up, and that is, in fact, Oblivion Remastered. So if you've watched the channel a lot, especially, of course, my original Oblivion review. It's a game that means a lot to me, both in terms of the time I played it, but also just because of how much I enjoy its various silly systems and how they come together. And somehow, almost miraculously, Oblivion Remastered manages to improve the parts that needed improving while still retaining the feel of Oblivion. Because while, on one hand, the original Oblivion's problems were pretty universally agreed upon, I really don't think it was ever going to be much of an issue to sit down and look at Oblivion and say, like, hey, what should we fix? I think everyone pretty well had exactly the same ideas on what needed changing. What is impressive about it, though, is that the way in which they approached those changes, I think, genuinely improved the game. But because of that and their sort of Frankenstein approach to the original game's engine and pairing with Unreal Engine 5 to handle things like the graphics and whatnot, it looks really good while, again, retaining that feel of Oblivion because it kind of still is Oblivion. It's using a lot of the original files and everything, with some additions made for stuff like voice acting, but they kept like the iconic characters as an example. Now, the sort of interesting thing there is that even for me, having enjoyed that game as much as I did, it is ultimately, a very old title in the form of Oblivion itself. And while I appreciate that they've sort of updated and made it easier to approach for people who had never actually played it for themselves previously, I also don't think experiences like that should be up for like current Game of the Year type awards. Unless they just happen to make a, specific category for only remasters or remakes, that kind of thing, and even then you'd probably want to split those two up as an example. So the problem with that is, not necessarily every year has enough entries for that to even really be a category on its own per se. But my main thing personally is I just don't think things like those should get so caught up in awarding nostalgia for, times that have come and gone, that it takes the air out of the room for experiences that are trying to push forward and continue building on the medium itself rather than just rehashing the old. At least that's how I personally feel about it. But as is the nuance involved in everything, even I can appreciate a really fun trip down memory lane, which is what that game was to me. But that is where we are going to end this one. There have been the games that I have enjoyed thus far in 2025 the most. Certainly hope you enjoyed it. I'd love to hear about the games you've enjoyed the most this year down in the comment section below, which of course means to like, comment, subscribe, all the YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.